The motorsport world froze in collective shock as Nicholas Hamilton limped onto the live Sky Sports set, tears streaming down his face. "I've been keeping a secret about Lewis for 25 years, he announced, his voice breaking with emotion, something that nearly destroyed his career before it began. And the person responsible is still in Formula One today." The bright lights of the Sky Sports F1 studio gleamed off the polished desk where host Natalie Pinkham sat with her regular panel of experts. It was Sunday evening after the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and the mood was celebratory. Lewis Hamilton had just claimed his 9th victory at his home race, extending his record for the most wins at a single venue. "What a race we've witnessed today," Natalie said, facing the camera with her professional smile. Lewis Hamilton, proving once again why he's considered one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history. David Coulthard nodded, his Scottish accent warm as he analyzed the race. The way he managed those tires in the final stint was nothing short of remarkable. Even at 37 years old, he's showing no signs of slowing down. The studio discussion continued as they dissected Lewis's performance, his strategy calls, and his emotional radio message after crossing the finish line. Behind the scenes, producers were preparing to transition to their next segment when a commotion broke out near the studio entrance. "Sir, you can't go in there. We're live," a production assistant's voice called out. The studio cameras swiveled as a man with an unsteady gait pushed past security. Nicholas Hamilton, Lewis's younger brother, walked onto the set, his movements affected by the cerebral palsy he'd battled since birth. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Nicholas said, his voice wavering, "but I need to say something. About Lewis. About my brother." Natalie's eyes widened in surprise, but her years of broadcasting experience kicked in. "Nicholas, what a surprise. Please, join us," she said, gesturing to an empty chair as producers frantically adjusted camera angles. Nicholas lowered himself into the seat, his hands visibly trembling. At 39, he resembled his famous brother. The same intense eyes, though his face carried different lines, etched by different struggles. "I've been carrying something for 25 years, Nicholas began, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. "Something about Lewis that no one knows. Something I did that changed everything." The studio fell completely silent. Viewers at home leaned toward their screens, social media notifications temporarily forgotten. "Lewis doesn't know I'm here," Nicholas continued. "He doesn't know what I'm about to say." He paused, swallowing hard. "But after watching him win today, I can't keep it inside anymore." In the Mercedes garage at Silverstone, engineers were still celebrating, champagne bottles empty, the championship trophy gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Lewis Hamilton stood surrounded by his team, his racing suit unzipped to the waist, revealing the top of his fireproof undershirt. Someone handed him a phone. "Lewis, you might want to see this," they said, pointing to a live stream of the Sky Sports broadcast. Lewis's smile faded as he saw his brother in the studio. The garage gradually quieted as more team members turned to watch. Back in the studio, Nicholas took a deep breath. When Lewis was 11, just starting to show real promise. In karting, something happened. Something that could have ended his career before it even began. Natalie glanced toward her producer, receiving a subtle nod to let Nicholas continue. This was unplanned television gold. "We didn't have much money back then," Nicholas said, his voice dropping slightly as he remembered. "Dad was working 3 jobs. Mom had left. We lived in Stevenage, not exactly the place you'd expect to produce a 7-time world champion." On screens across Britain and around the world, viewers watched, transfixed. In living rooms, pubs, and on phones, millions witnessed Nicholas Hamilton's unexpected appearance. There was this important regional championship, Nicholas continued. Lewis needed to win to get noticed by the right people. The McLaren Scouts were going to be there. A tear formed in the corner of Nicholas's eye. The night before that race, I discovered something terrible. And I made a choice that I've never told anyone about. Not even Lewis. In his Stevenage home, Anthony Hamilton, the father who had sacrificed everything for his son's futures, sat forward in his armchair, his coffee forgotten as he watched his younger son on national television. "What are you doing, Nick?" he whispered to the screen. Nicholas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Lewis has always been my hero. Not just because he's a champion, but because of who he is. How he treated me, protected me when kids would make fun of my condition. He never let anyone make me feel less than. David Coulthard, sensing the gravity of the moment, gently prompted, "What did you discover, Nicholas?" Nicholas looked directly into the camera now, as if speaking to Lewis personally. "I found out that someone had sabotaged Lewis's cart. Someone who didn't want a boy from our background to succeed." Gasps echoed through the studio. On social media, the hashtag #HamiltonBrother instantly began trending. They loosened bolts, tampered with the engine settings, small things that would have made the cart fail during the race, things that would look like bad luck or poor maintenance. In the Mercedes garage, Lewis Hamilton's expression hardened, his championship joy replaced by confusion and growing concern. "But that's not what I've been keeping secret all these years," Nicholas continued, his voice breaking. "What I've never told anyone is what I did next." The studio lights seemed to intensify, creating a spotlight effect around Nicholas as he prepared to reveal his long-held secret. "I fixed it," he said simply. "I was only 9 years old, but I'd watch Dad work on those carts every night. I knew what to look for. I spent the whole night before the race fixing everything they'd sabotaged." He paused, more tears flowing freely now. Lewis never knew. He went out the next day, won that race, and caught the attention of McLaren. The rest is history. Natalie leaned forward. "Why keep this secret for so long, Nicholas?" Nicholas looked down at his hands. "Because that's not all I found out that night. I discovered who was behind it. And that person—" He hesitated, visibly struggling with his next words. "That person is still in Formula One today, still close to Lewis." The revelation hung in the air like a thundercloud. In homes and bars across the world, viewers sat stunned. In the Mercedes garage, Lewis Hamilton stood completely still, the championship trophy forgotten beside him. "I'm sorry, Lewis," Nicholas said directly to the camera. "I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid of what it would do to your career, to your trust in the people around you." He took a deep breath. "And now, after all these years, after watching you become the greatest driver in history, I think you deserve to know the truth about what happened that night and about who was responsible." Nicholas Hamilton looked directly into the camera, ready to speak a name that would send shockwaves through the world of Formula One. The truth that had remained hidden for 25 years was about to be revealed. Just as Nicholas opened his mouth to speak the name, the studio lights flickered. The live broadcast cut to commercial, leaving millions of viewers on the edge of their seats. "I'm sorry, we need to take a quick break," Natalie said, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking. "We'll be right back with Nicholas Hamilton's revelation." During those 3 minutes of advertisements, phones across the Formula One paddock lit up with frantic calls and messages. In the Mercedes garage, Lewis handed his phone to his performance coach, Angela Cullen. "Get my car ready," he said quietly. "I need to get to that studio. Now." The cameras returned to find Nicholas still seated, hands clasped tightly together on the desk. His eyes were red but determined. "Before I say this name," Nicholas continued, "I want to take everyone back to where it all began. To understand why this matters so much, you need to know our story." The producers, sensing a ratings goldmine, quickly adjusted their plans. This was no longer just a post-race analysis show. This was becoming one of the most dramatic moments in sports broadcasting history. "Stevenage, 1990, Nicholas began. "That's where Lewis and I grew up. Not in a fancy neighborhood, but on Peartree Way, in a normal house with normal struggles." The screen behind Nicholas filled with grainy home video footage. A small boy in a too-large helmet climbing into a wooden go-kart, his father's hands steadying the vehicle. Lewis was 8 when he first sat in a proper kart at Rye House Kart Circuit, Nicholas continued. "I was 6, watching from my wheelchair most days. I have cerebral palsy, which means my body doesn't always do what I want it to do." The footage shifted to show a young Nicholas, his face bright with excitement, as he watched his older brother race. "Dad worked so hard for us," Nicholas said, his voice softening with memory. "He was an IT manager by day, but then he'd take evening jobs, weekend jobs, anything to pay for Lewis's racing. Some weeks he'd work over 100 hours. Another clip showed Anthony Hamilton, younger but already showing signs of the determination that would help propel his son to greatness. Working on a kart engine late at night. A small Lewis handing him tools. Mom had left when I was little, so it was mostly just the 3 of us. Dad, Lewis, and me. We were a team. Nicholas paused as more footage played, Lewis winning trophies almost as big as himself, always running to hug his father and brother afterward. "Lewis always protected me," Nicholas said. "At school, when kids would make fun of how I walked or talked, Lewis would stand up for me. He'd say, 'That's my brother you're talking about.' He never let anyone make me feel less than." In the Mercedes garage, Lewis watched the broadcast, his eyes glistening. These were memories he rarely spoke about publicly, moments from before fame and fortune changed everything. "We didn't have what other racing families had," Nicholas continued. "Most of the kids Lewis raced against came from wealthy backgrounds. They had the best equipment, professional coaches, motorhomes at the tracks." The screen showed a humble tent. Beside a racetrack, Anthony Hamilton cooking sausages on a portable stove, while young Lewis studied the track layout, and Nicholas watched from his folding chair. But what we lacked in money, Dad made up for with heart. He studied engineering books at night after work, so he could tune Lewis's engines himself. He'd stay up learning racing lines so he could coach Lewis before races. Nicholas smiled at the memory. Lewis would practice in the rain when other kids went home. Dad would say, "If you can master it in the wet, you'll be unbeatable in the dry." That's why Lewis is still so good in wet conditions today. David Coulthard nodded in recognition, former driver to former driver. That dedication shows. By the time Lewis was 10, Nicholas continued, people were starting to notice his talent. He was winning nearly everything, even against older kids with better karts. The footage now showed Lewis standing on a podium, a gap-toothed smile beneath his helmet as he lifted yet another trophy. That's when things got serious. McLaren was looking for young talent for their driver development program. Ron Dennis was sending scouts to watch regional races. Nicholas leaned forward. There was this important championship coming up, the cadet class finals at Buckmore Park. Everyone knew the McLaren scouts would be there. His expression darkened. And that's when I discovered what someone had done to Lewis's kart. The studio fell silent again. Even the cameramen held their breath. The night before that race, Dad had to work. It was just Lewis and me at home. Lewis went to bed early. He always took racing so seriously, even then. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the garage to look at his kart. Nicholas's voice grew quieter, pulling the audience in. That's when I noticed something wasn't right. The steering column bolts were loose. The engine timing was off. The brake cable was frayed, just enough that it might snap during the race. Shook his head. These weren't random problems. Someone had deliberately sabotaged that kart. How did you know it was sabotage? Natalie asked, giving voice to what viewers were wondering. Because Dad was meticulous about maintenance. He would triple-check everything, and I'd watched him prepare the kart that very afternoon. It had been perfect. Nicholas looked directly at the camera again. Someone had come to our garage after we'd gone inside. Someone with access. Someone who knew exactly how to make Lewis fail without it looking suspicious. In living rooms across Britain, viewers sat transfixed. In the Mercedes garage, Lewis stood motionless, hearing for the first time about a threat he'd never known existed. I was just a kid, Nicholas continued, but I'd watched Dad work on those karts every day for years. I knew what to look for, so I spent the whole night fixing everything they'd done. He smiled sadly. My hands don't always work well because of my condition, but that night, they didn't shake at all. It took me hours, but by morning, the kart was perfect again. You never told your father? Coulthard asked. Nicholas shook his head. I was afraid he'd pull Lewis from the race, afraid he'd call the police. And I knew how much this opportunity meant for Lewis. The screen showed footage of that very race, a tiny Lewis Hamilton, his yellow helmet distinctive among the pack, driving with a precision and aggression that belied his age. He won by 14 seconds, Nicholas said proudly. The McLaren scouts were impressed. 3 months later, Lewis met Ron Dennis at the Autosport Awards and told him, I want to race for you one day. Ron gave him his phone number and said, call me in 9 years. Nicholas smiled at the famous story. But he didn't wait 9 years. He signed Lewis when he was 13, the youngest driver McLaren had ever taken on. The studio was completely silent now as Nicholas prepared to reveal what he'd kept hidden for over 2 decades. What I discovered that night, what I've never told anyone until now, is that I found something else in the garage. A team badge, AEE, pass that had fallen from the pocket of whoever sabotaged the kart. Nicholas took a deep breath, his hands steady now. The person who tried to end Lewis Hamilton's career before it began. The person who couldn't stand the idea of a kid from a council house background succeeding in their elite world. In the Mercedes garage, Lewis's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. He answered it cautiously. Lewis, it's Martin. Don't let your brother say another word, please. Lewis felt his blood run cold at the voice on the phone. Martin? Martin who? He asked, though a part of him already knew the answer. Martin Whitmarsh, the voice replied. Please, Lewis. Some things are better left in the past. Lewis ended the call without responding, his mind racing. Martin Whitmarsh, the former McLaren team principal who had overseen much of Lewis's early Formula One career. The man who had been Ron Dennis's right-hand man when Lewis was signed to their young driver program. Back in the Sky Sports studio, Nicholas continued his story, unaware of the phone call his brother had just received. The team badge I found belonged to someone from McLaren, Nicholas revealed, sending shockwaves through the studio. But not from Ron Dennis's side of the operation. Nicholas paused, looking directly into the camera. It was from Whitmarsh's division. Martin Whitmarsh, the man who would later become McLaren's team principal when Lewis entered Formula One. Gasps echoed through the studio. On social media, Whitmarsh-gate began trending instantly alongside Hamilton brother. "Are you suggesting Martin Whitmarsh sabotaged Lewis Hamilton's kart?" Natalie asked, her professional demeanor barely containing her shock. "I'm not saying he did it personally," Nicholas clarified, "but someone with access to his credentials was in our garage that night. Someone who didn't want a kid like Lewis in their program." In the Mercedes garage, Lewis grabbed his jacket and car keys. "I need to get to the studio," he told his performance. Coach. Now, the story flashed back again to 1994, when Lewis was 9. The screen showed footage of the Hamilton brothers as children. Lewis, skinny but strong, lifting his younger brother out of his wheelchair to sit by the side of a kart track. After Lewis caught McLaren's attention, everything changed, Nicholas explained. He was offered a spot in their driver development program, but it meant spending less time at home. The screen showed a young Lewis, bags packed, hugging his younger brother goodbye. Lewis went to live with another family closer to McLaren's facilities, Nicholas continued. A family that could offer him more opportunities, more stability for his racing career. The pain in Nicholas's voice was evident. Dad knew it was the right thing for Lewis's future. I knew it too. But knowing something is right doesn't make it hurt any less. The footage showed a young Nicholas watching karting events from the sidelines, now without his brother beside him. While Lewis trained with McLaren's coaches, raced in better championships, and went to a school that supported his racing schedule, I stayed with Mom in Stevenage. My cerebral palsy was getting more challenging as I grew. I needed different kinds of support. Nicholas's voice grew softer. Our paths just diverged. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just life. The screen displayed Lewis's meteoric rise through the junior categories, Formula Renault, Formula 3, GP2, winning championships at every level. We'd talk on the phone, but less and less as time went on. Lewis was so focused, so determined. When you're chasing a dream that big, everything else fades into the background sometimes. Nicholas smiled sadly. And I understood. I never resented him for it. How could I? He was living the dream we all believed in. The footage shifted to 2007, Lewis Hamilton's debut Formula One season with McLaren. The youngest driver in a top team partnered with defending world champion Fernando Alonso. When Lewis made it to Formula One, I was so proud, Nicholas said. That first race in Australia, watching him overtake Fernando into the first corner, I cried. We all did. The screen showed Lewis's incredible rookie season, 9 consecutive podiums from his first 9 races, a record that still stands today. But something was always there, in the back of my mind, Nicholas continued. The memory of that badge. The knowledge that someone at McLaren had tried to stop all this from happening. The footage showed Martin Whitmarsh, then McLaren's CEO, standing beside Lewis at press conferences, his hand on the young driver's shoulder. I would watch Lewis with Whitmarsh, see them working together, and wonder if I should say something, Nicholas admitted. But Lewis was happy. He was succeeding. What good would it do to cast suspicion on people he needed to trust? The screen showed Lewis's heartbreaking near miss of the championship in his rookie year, losing by a single point to Kimi Räikkönen. When Lewis won the championship in 2008, in that last corner drama at Brazil, I thought maybe the secret could stay buried. Forever, Nicholas said. Justice had been served. The boy they tried to stop had become champion of the world. But Nicholas's expression darkened. Then came 2009. McLaren built a terrible car. Lewis struggled all year. And who was team principal by then? Martin Whitmarsh. The Feek. Footage showed Lewis's frustrating 2009 season, the defending world champion fighting to even score points in a car well off the pace. And 2010, 2011, 2012, years when McLaren should have given Lewis championship-winning cars, but somehow never quite delivered. Nicholas continued. Years of strange strategic decisions, mechanical failures at crucial moments. He leaned forward. I started to wonder, was it happening again? Not sabotage exactly, but priority being given elsewhere? Resources being directed to Jenson Button instead? The studio was silent as the footage showed Lewis's increasingly frustrated expressions during his final McLaren years. When Lewis announced he was leaving McLaren for Mercedes in 2013, most people thought he was crazy. Nicholas said, Mercedes had won just one race in 3 years. Why leave McLaren for them? Nicholas looked directly at the camera. But I knew. I understood. Somewhere deep down, Lewis felt what I knew, that McLaren wasn't the place it once seemed. The footage shifted to Lewis with Niki Lauda and Toto Wolff signing his Mercedes contract. Lewis found a new family at Mercedes, Nicholas said, people who believed in him completely. And look what's happened since. The screen filled with images of Lewis's 6 championships with Mercedes, his record-breaking wins, his emergence as not just a sporting icon, but a cultural force. All this time, I've kept that secret, Nicholas said. The badge, the sabotage, the suspicions. Because what good would it do to bring it up? Lewis was thriving. He'd overcome whatever they'd tried to do. Nicholas paused, his expression troubled. But then, 3 months ago, I heard something that made me realize this wasn't just about the past. The studio door suddenly burst open. Lewis Hamilton himself stood there, still in his race suit, his expression unreadable as he looked at his brother. Nick, he said quietly. What are you doing? Nicholas met his brother's gaze, tears in his eyes. Telling the truth. Finally. Lewis walked slowly to the desk, all cameras following his movement. He sat beside his brother, reached over, and took his hand. Then let's tell it together, Lewis said, because there's something I never told you either. The studio fell silent. As Lewis Hamilton, still in his Mercedes race suit with champagne stains visible on the sleeve, sat beside his brother. The 7-time world champion's unexpected arrival had turned an already dramatic broadcast into something unprecedented in sports television. Natalie Pinkham, visibly stunned, managed to recover her professional composure. Lewis, we certainly didn't expect to see you here today. Lewis nodded, his eyes never leaving his brother's face. When someone you love is about to change your life on national television, you show up. His voice was calm, but carried an intensity that filled the Edu room. You knew? Nicholas asked, confusion crossing his features. Not everything, Lewis replied, but enough. I've suspected for years that someone tried to stop my career before it started. The studio crew had gone completely still. Even the floor manager had stopped giving time signals, transfixed by the unfolding drama. How? Nicholas asked. I never told anyone. Lewis smiled sadly. You forgot about Mrs. Pearson. Nicholas's eyes widened in recognition. Our neighbor? Lewis nodded. She saw you in the garage that night, working on my kart until dawn. She told Dad years later, when I won my first Grand Prix with McLaren in 2007. The footage on the screen behind them changed to show Lewis's maiden victory in Canada. The young driver standing atop the podium, tears streaming down his face as God Save the Queen played. That was my 6th race in Formula One, Lewis explained to the viewers. No one expected me to win so soon. I was a rookie, racing against two-time world champion Fernando Alonso in the same team. The footage showed Lewis's incredible drive in some changing conditions, his overtakes, his control in the wet. After that win, Dad called me. He was so proud, so emotional. That's when he told me about what Mrs. Pearson had seen, about you saving my cart, my race, maybe my career. Nicholas shook his head in disbelief. Dad knew? All this time? He knew you fixed something, Lewis clarified. But not about the sabotage, not about the badge. He thought you were just doing maintenance, being my protective little brother. Lewis turned to face Natalie and the cameras directly. What Nicholas doesn't know is that wasn't the only time someone tried to derail my career. A murmur went through the studio. On social media, viewers were posting in real time the hashtags #JackhamHamiltonBrothers and Harder F1 conspiracy trending worldwide. In 2007, my rookie season, strange things started happening. Lewis continued. Setup sheets would go missing. Data from my car would be accidentally deleted. Fuel calculations would be slightly off. He looked at his brother. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. You were just starting your own racing journey despite your cerebral palsy. You had enough challenges. The screen showed footage of Nicholas competing in the Renault Clio Cup. Adapted hand controls allowing him to race despite his disability. I watched you fight so hard to race, Lewis said, his voice thick with emotion. You never complained about your condition. You just found ways to overcome it. You inspired me to keep fighting too. Lewis turned back to the cameras. In 2012, when I decided to leave McLaren for Mercedes, everyone thought I was making a huge mistake. McLaren was winning races. Mercedes had one victory in 3 years. The footage showed news headlines questioning Lewis's decision, pundits suggesting he was leaving for money rather than racing success. What they didn't know was that I'd seen an internal McLaren memo, Lewis revealed. A memo discussing how to manage my departure over the next few years. They were already planning to replace me with Kevin Magnussen. I wasn't supposed to see that document. David Coulthard leaned forward. Are you suggesting McLaren wanted you out? Lewis chose his words carefully. I'm saying certain people at McLaren didn't believe in me the way Mercedes did. Didn't want me to succeed the way Toto Wolff and Niki Lauda promised they would help me do. The screen showed Lewis with Niki Lauda, the 3-time world champion, who had convinced Lewis to join Mercedes, their arms around each other's shoulders. Niki told me something I never forgot, Lewis said. They're afraid of you, Lewis. Not just your speed, but what you represent. A change they're not ready for. Lewis turned to his brother. But Nick, what was it you heard 3 months ago? What made you decide to speak out now? Nicholas took a deep breath. Lewis, I saw Martin Whitmarsh at a charity event in London. He was drunk, talking to Adrian Newey. He didn't know I could hear them. The studio seemed to hold its collective breath. He said, we almost stopped him, you know. Back when he was just a kid in karts. Should have tried harder. Look at him now, changing the sport in ways we never wanted. Lewis's expression hardened. That doesn't surprise me. But it doesn't explain why you're here today, on live television, instead of just telling me privately. Nicholas looked at his brother with tears in his eyes. Because last week, I got a call from Ferrari. They've offered you a contract for next year, haven't they? Lewis didn't answer, but his slight shift in posture was confirmation enough. They called me, Nicholas continued, asked me to convince you to sign, said it was time for you to come home to Ferrari for your final years in Formula One. Lewis's eyes narrowed. Who called you? That's just it, Nicholas said. It wasn't Vasseur or any of the current team. It was Martin Whitmarsh. Lewis sat back, visibly stunned. Whitmarsh works for Ferrari now? Not officially, Nicholas explained. He's a consultant. But Lewis, don't you see? He's trying to get you away from Mercedes just when they're building a new car for next year's regulations. Just when you could break Schumacher's record with your 8th championship. Lewis was silent for a moment, processing this information. Then he turned to his brother with a gentle smile. Nick, I've known about Whitmarsh at Ferrari for months. Toto warned me. It was Nicholas's turn to look surprised. Then why didn't I tell you? Lewis finished for him. Because I knew how much you've always worried about me. How you've always tried to protect me, even when we were kids. The screen showed old footage of the brothers, a young Lewis teaching Nicholas how to use hand controls on a simulator, their faces close, laughing together. What you don't realize, Lewis continued, is that I've always known I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Every time they tried to stop me, and believe me, they've tried many times, I've had people in my corner. Dad, my team at Mercedes, Angela. He gestured to his performance coach who stood at the back of the studio. And you, Nick. Always you. Nicholas wiped away tears. I just couldn't bear the thought of them hurting you again. Using you for their own agenda, then discarding you like they did at McLaren. Lewis squeezed his brother's hand. They can't hurt me anymore, Nick. We've already won. Look at what we've done together. The screen filled with images of Lewis's 7 world championships, his record 103 race wins, his knighthood ceremony. But there's something else, Lewis said, his voice growing serious. Something I've never told anyone. Something about that day at Buckmore Park, the race you saved. The studio fell completely silent. I knew, Lewis said simply. Nicholas stared at his brother. Knew what? I knew someone had tampered with my kart, Lewis revealed. I could feel it when I sat in it that morning. The steering wasn't right. The brakes felt strange. But I didn't say anything. Why not? Nicholas asked, bewildered. Lewis's eyes held a fierce determination that millions of viewers recognized from his most challenging races. Because I wanted to prove I could win anyway, he said. Even with a disadvantage. Even with the odds stacked against me. He smiled at his brother's shocked expression. What I didn't know was that you had already fixed everything. So when I went out there, expecting to fight a damaged kart, everything worked perfectly. I won by 14 seconds. Lewis turned to Tudor Tuaib, the cameras. That's been the story of my career. People trying to hold me back. And those who love me making sure I have a fair chance. Not an advantage, just fairness. He looked back at his brother. So thank you, Nick, for that night, for every time you've stood by me. But there's no need to protect me from Whitmarsh or anyone else anymore. Lewis's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then looked up with a strange expression. It's Toto, he said. He says Martin Whitmarsh is about to hold an emergency press conference. About what? Natalie asked. Lewis's eyes met his brother's. About us. About this broadcast. The studio producer hurried over to Natalie, whispering something in her ear. She nodded, then faced the camera. We're receiving word that Martin Whitmarsh is indeed about to make a statement from Ferrari headquarters in Maranello, she announced. We'll be cutting to that live in just a moment. Lewis and Nicholas Hamilton sat side by side, hands still clasped together, waiting to hear what the man accused of trying to sabotage their lives would say in his defense. The screen behind them flickered, ready to show Martin Whitmarsh's face. The man who might finally reveal the full truth behind Formula One's greatest dynasty and its greatest controversy. The studio lights dimmed as the screen behind Lewis and Nicholas Hamilton came to life. The feed from Ferrari headquarters showed an empty podium with the iconic prancing horse logo prominently displayed. A murmur of anticipation filled the room as everyone waited for Martin Whitmarsh to appear. But the screen remained empty. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties with the feed from Maranello," Natalie announced after a minute of awkward silence. "We'll return to that as soon as possible." She turned back to the Hamilton brothers. "While we wait, Nicholas, perhaps you could tell us more about your own journey in motorsport. Many viewers might not be familiar with your racing career." Nicholas nodded, momentarily relieved at the change of subject. "For most of my childhood, racing wasn't something I thought I could do. With cerebral palsy, even walking is challenging some days." The screen changed to show footage of Nicholas in physical therapy as a teenager, determinedly working to improve his mobility with leg braces and walking aids. "I watched Lewis race for years, feeling proud but also separate from that world," Nicholas continued. "It wasn't until I was 23 that I even tried driving on a track." Lewis smiled at the memory. "I remember that day. You were terrified." "Absolutely petrified," Nicholas agreed with a laugh. "But Lewis had these cars fitted with hand controls and he said, 'Just try it. If you hate it, we never have to talk about it again.'" The footage showed Nicholas's first tentative laps around a track, his movements initially hesitant, but growing more confident with each circuit. "I didn't hate it," Nicholas said simply. "I loved it. For the first time in my life, my disability didn't matter. In the car, I could be just as fast as anyone else." Lewis watched his brother with evident pride. He was a natural, different driving. Style than mine, smoother, more precise, but genuinely quick. "I started competing in 2011, Nicholas explained. First in the Renault Clio Cup, then the British Touring Car Championship. I became the first disabled driver to compete in the BTCC. The screen showed Nicholas racing, overtaking opponents, standing on podiums, creating his own legacy separate from his famous brother. But it wasn't easy, Nicholas admitted, his expression darkening. There were teams that wouldn't consider me because of my disability, sponsors who backed out when they realized I needed special car adaptations. Lewis's jaw tightened. And there were people who claimed he was only getting opportunities because of me? Nicholas nodded. That was the hardest part. Every time I achieved something, someone would say it was only because I was Lewis Hamilton's brother. The screen showed news headlines questioning Nicholas's abilities, suggesting he was taking a seat from more deserving drivers. What those critics didn't know, Nicholas continued, his voice stronger now, was that Lewis and I had made a promise to each other. He would never interfere with my career. No calls to team bosses, no pulling strings. I had to make it on my own merit. Lewis confirmed this with a nod. The only thing I ever did was pay for some of his early equipment. After that, he was completely on his own. And that made the struggle so much harder, Nicholas admitted. There were nights I'd sit in my apartment, watching Lewis win Grand Prix while I was fighting for 15th place in touring cars, wondering if I should just give up. The pain in his voice was evident. Not because I was jealous of Lewis, never that, but because I wondered if I was fooling myself, trying to follow in such enormous footsteps. Lewis reached over and squeezed his brother's shoulder. But you never gave up. No, I didn't, Nicholas agreed. Because every time I felt like quitting, I'd remember that night with your kart. How I refused to let someone else determine your fate. And I'd think, if I quit racing because it's hard, I'm letting them win again. The studio had fallen completely, silent as viewers witnessed this intimate moment between the brothers. But there was something else weighing on me all these years, Nicholas continued. Something darker than my own struggles. He looked directly at the camera, his expression troubled. Every time I watched Lewis race for McLaren, I'd see Martin Whitmarsh in the garage, standing near Lewis's car. The man whose badge I'd found at our home that night. And I'd wonder, what is he doing now? What might he be planning? Nicholas turned to his brother. When you'd have mysterious mechanical failures, when your pit stops would be slightly slower than your teammates, when strategic decisions would somehow never work in your favor, I couldn't help but wonder. Lewis was silent for a moment before responding. I had the same thoughts sometimes, especially in 2012, my last year there. 5 race-leading mechanical failures in one season. That's not normal. When you announced you were leaving for Mercedes, Nicholas said, I felt relief more than anything, even though everyone said you were making a mistake. The footage showed press conferences from 2012, with pundits questioning Lewis's decision to leave a race-winning team for Mercedes, which had been struggling in the midfield. They said you were just going for the money, Nicholas recalled. That you were throwing away your career, Lewis smiled. And you were the only person outside Mercedes who told me I was making the right choice. Because I knew what they'd been doing to you at McLaren, Nicholas said firmly. Or, at least, I suspected. Before Lewis could respond, the producer signaled to Natalie, It appears we now have Martin Whitmarsh ready to make his statement from Maranello, she announced. The screen flickered back to life, showing a visibly agitated Martin Whitmarsh stepping up to the Ferrari podium. Though in his 60s now, he still had the same stern expression that had characterized his years as McLaren's team principal. Good evening, Whitmarsh began, his voice tight. I'm making this statement in response to the unfounded accusations being made on Sky Sports F1 by Nicholas Hamilton. He adjusted his glasses nervously. I categorically deny any involvement in any alleged sabotage of Lewis Hamilton's equipment at any point in his career. These claims are not only false, but potentially libelous. In the studio, Nicholas leaned forward, his expression intense. Look at his left hand, he whispered to Lewis. The tremor. He's lying. Lewis studied the screen carefully. Sure enough, Whitmarsh's left hand was shaking slightly as he gripped the podium. While I acknowledge that I did work at McLaren during Lewis's early career and later as team principal, Whitmarsh continued, any suggestion that I or anyone under my direction attempted to hinder his progress is completely false. He looked directly into the camera. Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history. His talent is undeniable. Why would anyone attempt to sabotage such a generational talent? Nicholas shook his head in disbelief. Because he wasn't supposed to succeed, he muttered. He wasn't from their world. I'm disappointed that what should be a celebration of Lewis's remarkable victory today has been overshadowed by these sensationalist claims, Whitmarsh concluded. I will be consulting my legal team about next steps. As the feed cut back to the studio, Lewis leaned over to Nicholas. He's scared, he whispered. Really scared? Of course he is, Nicholas replied. Because he knows what I found that night wasn't just a badge. Lewis's eyes widened. What do you mean? Nicholas took a deep breath. There's something I haven't told you. Something I found with the badge. The studio fell silent once more as Nicholas reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I found this that night too, he said, carefully unfolding the paper. It was tucked into the back of the badge holder. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. What is it? Lewis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas handed the paper to his brother. A McLaren internal memo, dated the day before your kart was sabotaged. Lewis's hands trembled slightly as he read the paper. His expression changed from curiosity to shock to anger. "This is," he began, then stopped, seemingly unable to find the words. "Yes," Nicholas said grimly. "It's a directive from senior management, instructing staff to ensure that the Hamilton situation is handled appropriately before the McLaren scouts attend Buckmore Park." Lewis looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This is signed by—" Nicholas nodded. "Exactly. Not by Whitmarsh, by someone much more powerful. Someone still in Formula One today." The studio cameras zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the memo, revealing a name that would send shock waves through the world of motorsport. As Lewis stared at the paper, in his hands, the weight of a 25-year conspiracy finally revealed, Nicholas turned back to the cameras. "This is why I had to speak out today," he said firmly. "Not just about the past, but about what's happening now. Because the same people who tried to stop Lewis all those years ago are still trying. They're just using different methods." Lewis folded the paper carefully and placed it in his race suit pocket. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The shock was gone, replaced by a determination familiar to millions of fans who had watched him overcome countless obstacles on track. "Thank you, Nick," he said quietly, "for protecting me then, and for telling the truth now." He turned to face the cameras directly. "This isn't just about me or my career. This is about who gets to succeed in Formula One, about who belongs in this sport." As he spoke these words, Lewis's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then showed the screen to Nicholas. "It's from Toto," Lewis said. "Ferrari has just announced an emergency press conference. The team principal and chairman will be speaking. In 5 minutes." Nicholas's eyes widened. "But Ferrari had nothing to do with this. Why would they?" "Because," Lewis interrupted, "the person who signed that memo now works for them." The studio fell silent as the implication of Lewis's words sank in. Nicholas stared at his brother, momentarily speechless. "You don't mean—" Nicholas finally managed. Lewis nodded grimly. "Yes. The signature on that memo belongs to Stefano Domenicali." The EI name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Stefano Domenicali, the current Formula One CEO, who had previously been Ferrari's team principal from 2008 to 2014. Natalie Pinkham visibly struggled to maintain her professional composure. "Lewis, that's an extraordinary claim. Are you suggesting that the current CEO of Formula One was involved in attempting to sabotage your career before it even began?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Lewis replied calmly. "The evidence speaks for itself." He patted the pocket where he'd placed the yellowed memo. In 1999, before he was Ferrari's team principal, Domenicali worked for Ferrari's F1 driver development program. He was responsible for scouting young talent across Europe. David Coulthard leaned forward. "But why would Ferrari care about a young British karter being scouted by McLaren?" "It wasn't about Ferrari versus McLaren," Nicholas explained. "It was about maintaining the status quo in Formula One, about who gets to succeed in this sport." The screen behind them showed historical footage of Formula One from the 1990s, a sport dominated by wealthy Europeans from privileged backgrounds. "Remember what Formula One looked like in 1999? Lewis said. "How many black drivers were there? How many drivers from council estates? How many drivers whose fathers worked 3 jobs to support them?" He paused. "The answer is 0. Formula One wasn't ready for someone like me. Not then." "But why would Domenicali specifically target you?" Natalie asked. Lewis shook his head. I don't think it was personal. I think it was systemic. A sport protecting itself from change. Nicholas nodded in agreement. When Lewis started winning everything in karts, it challenged the narrative. The narrative that said you needed to be from a certain background to succeed in motorsport. The producer hurried over to Natalie again, whispering urgently in her ear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to cut live to Ferrari headquarters," Natalie announced, where team principal Frédéric Vasseur and Ferrari chairman John Elkann are about to speak. The screen flickered again, now showing a packed press room in Maranello. Frédéric Vasseur stepped up to the microphone, his expression grave. "Good evening," he began. "In light of the serious allegations being discussed on Sky Sports F1, Ferrari wishes to make our position clear." He cleared his throat. "First, Martin Whitmarsh is not currently employed by Scuderia Ferrari in any capacity, official or unofficial. His statement was made independently and does not represent the views of this team." In the studio, Lewis and Nicholas exchanged glances of surprise. Second, Vasseur continued, "Ferrari has never authorized any improper actions against competitors at any level of motorsport. Such behavior goes against the sporting values we have upheld for over 75 years." He stepped aside, allowing John Elkann to take the microphone. The Ferrari chairman looked directly into the camera. "Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest drivers in the history of our sport," Elkann stated firmly. "Any suggestion that Ferrari would be involved in undermining his career, past or present, is categorically false." He paused, then continued with what appeared to be a prepared statement. "However, in light of today's revelations, Ferrari has decided to immediately terminate all consultancy arrangements with certain individuals previously associated with other teams, effective immediately." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "He's distancing Ferrari from Whitmarsh, and possibly Domenicali," Nicholas added quietly. Elkann wasn't finished. "Furthermore, we believe these serious allegations deserve a full and transparent investigation. We are therefore calling on the FIA to launch an immediate inquiry into these matters." He looked directly into the camera. "Lewis, if you're watching, Ferrari has always respected you as a competitor and as a champion. We hope the truth, whatever it may be, comes to light." As the feed cut back to the studio, Lewis sat back in his chair, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. "Well," he said finally, "I didn't see that coming." "Me neither," Nicholas admitted. "I expected denials, legal threats, not calls for an investigation." Lewis's phone buzzed yet again. This time when he looked at it, he smiled. "It's Toto," he explained. "He says Mercedes is standing with me 100%. The team is preparing a statement supporting an investigation." Nicholas looked at his brother with concern. "Lewis, this is getting bigger than I expected. Are you sure you want this? It could shake the foundations of Formula One." Lewis was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Maybe those foundations need shaking," he said finally. "Maybe it's time the whole truth came out." He turned back to the cameras. "When I left McLaren for Mercedes in 2013, everyone thought I was making a mistake. McLaren had just built the ED fastest car of 2012. They were winning races. Mercedes had won victory in 3 years." The screen showed footage of Lewis's announcement, the skeptical press conference questions, the headlines questioning his decision. "What people didn't know was what Niki Lauda told me in private," Lewis continued. He said, "Lewis, at McLaren, you will always be Ron Dennis's driver. At Mercedes, you can be yourself." Lewis's expression softened at the memory of the late Connie Diet, 3-time world champion who had convinced him to join Mercedes. "Niki also told me something else," Lewis revealed. "He said there were people in Formula One who didn't want me to succeed. Not because of my driving, no one could question that anymore, but because of what my success represented. A change in the sport's DNA. The footage now showed Lewis's early days at Mercedes, the initial struggles of 2013, then the dawn of the hybrid era in 2014 when Mercedes began their dominance. What Niki and Toto gave me at Mercedes wasn't just a fast car, Lewis explained. They gave me freedom. Freedom to be myself, to speak out about things that matter to me, to use my platform for more than just racing. The screen filled with images of Lewis's evolution, his changing fashion choices, his music collaborations, his environmental activism, his push for diversity in motorsport. At McLaren, I had to fit a certain mold, Lewis admitted. I had to look a certain way, speak a certain way. At Mercedes, I could finally be authentic. Nicholas nodded. That's when the Lewis I knew as a kid came back. The real Lewis, not the corporate version McLaren had created. And look what happened, Lewis said, gesturing to the images of his 6 world championships with Mercedes. When I was finally allowed to be myself, I achieved things no one thought possible. He leaned forward. That's what this is really about. Not just who tried to stop me 25 years ago, but who's still trying to limit what I can be today. Before Nicholas could respond, Natalie interrupted gently. I'm sorry, but we're receiving word that Stefano Domenicali is about to make a statement from Formula One headquarters. The screen changed again, now showing Domenicali standing at a podium with the Formula One logo behind him. His face was ashen, his usual confident demeanor notably absent. Good evening, he began, his Italian accent more pronounced than usual. I have just been made aware of certain allegations regarding my past actions. He paused, collecting himself. I want to state clearly that I categorically deny any involvement in any attempt to sabotage Lewis Hamilton's career at any point in time. Domenicali shuffled some papers before continuing. However, as CEO of Formula One, I recognize that these allegations must be addressed transparently and thoroughly. He looked up, directly into the camera. Therefore, I am temporarily stepping aside from my role while an independent investigation takes place. The integrity of our sport must come first. In the studio, Lewis and Nicholas exchanged stunned glances. He's resigning? Nicholas whispered. Temporarily stepping aside, Lewis corrected. Big difference. Domenicali wasn't finished. I also want to speak directly to Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, throughout your exceptional career, you have transformed our sport in ways far beyond the racetrack. Your push for diversity, inclusion, and environmental responsibility has made Formula One better. He paused. Whatever happened in the past, and I maintain my innocence in these matters, your legacy is secure. You have earned every victory, every championship, through your extraordinary talent and determination. As Domenicali's statement concluded, the feed cut back to the studio. Lewis sat silently for a moment, processing what he'd just heard. Well, he said finally with a small smile, that sounded almost like an apology. Nicholas studied his brother's face. Are you okay? Lewis nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I am. He turned to his brother. This was never about revenge, Nick. It was about the truth, about making sure the same things don't happen to the next generation of drivers. He pulled out his phone again, checking another message. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The FIA president is calling for an emergency meeting, Lewis announced. They're establishing an independent commission to investigate historical discrimination in Formula One. Nicholas smiled. So it begins. Lewis reached over and squeezed his brother's shoulder. No, Nick. It began the night you fixed my cart. When you refused to let them stop me." The brothers sat together in silent understanding as the world of Formula One began its reckoning with a hidden past and the promise of a more inclusive future. But neither Hamilton knew that the real bombshell was still to come, a revelation that would make today's confessions seem minor by comparison, a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about their own story. The morning after their televised revelations, Lewis and Nicholas sat in the privacy of Lewis's Monaco apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Mediterranean, but neither brother was admiring the scenery. Both were staring at their phones, scrolling through the avalanche of notifications, messages, and news alerts that had flooded in overnight. "It's the top story everywhere," Nicholas said, shaking his head in disbelief. "BBC, CNN, ESPN, even non-sports outlets are covering it." Lewis nodded absently, his attention focused on a particular message. The FIA just issued a formal statement. They're launching a full investigation into historical instances of discrimination and sabotage in Formula One. Nicholas put down his phone and studied his brother. Despite the storm they had unleashed, Lewis seemed calmer than he had in years. "Any regrets?" Nicholas asked. Lewis thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. Whatever happens next, the truth needed to come out." He walked to the window, looking out at the yachts dotting the harbor. The contrast between his current life and their humble beginnings in Stevenage couldn't have been more stark. "We've come a long way from Pertwee Way, haven't we?" Lewis mused, as if reading his brother's thoughts. Nicholas joined him at the window. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it. You living here in Monaco, among princes and billionaires, me with my place in London. Both of us racing professionally, when the doctors once told me I might never walk properly." Lewis smiled. "Remember when Dad would drive us to races in that old van, with the leaky roof and the heater that never worked? And we'd eat cold-baked beans from the can to save money for tires," Nicholas added, laughing at the memory. The brothers fell silent, each lost in their own reflections of the journey that had brought them here. "There's something I need to ask you, Nick," Lewis said finally, turning to face his brother. "Why didn't you tell me about the badge and the memo sooner? All these years," Nicholas sighed. "At first, I was just a kid. I was scared. Then, as you started succeeding, I didn't want to cast a shadow over your achievements." He paused. "And if I'm being completely honest, part of me worried you wouldn't believe me." Lewis looked surprised. "Why wouldn't I believe you?" "Because we grew apart, Lewis," Nicholas said quietly. "Not intentionally, but it happened. As your fame grew, as you moved in different circles, became friends with celebrities and fashion designers and musicians, sometimes I felt like I didn't know you anymore." The pain in Nicholas's voice was evident, and Lewis winced at the truth of his words. "I'd see you on Instagram at Met Galas and movie premieres," Nicholas continued, "dating supermodels, hanging out with rappers, living this life that seemed a million miles from Stevenage. From us." Lewis was silent for a moment. "I never meant to drift away," he said finally. "The fame. It happened so gradually that I barely noticed it changing me, changing my life." The screen in the living room caught their attention as it automatically switched on with a news alert. The brothers turned to see a special report beginning on Sky Sports News. "Breaking news in the unfolding Formula One controversy," the presenter announced. Former McLaren executive Martin Whitmarsh has released a statement addressing the allegations made by Nicholas and Lewis Hamilton. The brothers moved to the couch, sitting side by side as Whitmarsh's statement was read aloud. After reflection, I feel compelled to clarify certain matters regarding my tenure at McLaren. While I categorically deny any personal involvement in attempts to sabotage Lewis Hamilton's equipment, I acknowledge that I became aware of concerning attitudes and behaviors toward him within the organization. Lewis and Nicholas exchanged surprised glances. During Lewis's final years at McLaren, the statement continued, I observed instances where his concerns were dismissed, his feedback deprioritized, and his position within the team undermined. While I did not create these circumstances, I regret that I did not do more to address them. That's unexpected, Nicholas said. Lewis nodded. He's admitting something happened, just not taking personal responsibility. The statement concluded, I have agreed to cooperate fully with the FIA investigation, including providing all relevant documentation from my time at McLaren. Lewis Hamilton is an extraordinary champion whose achievements have transcended sports, and he deserves nothing less than complete transparency about his career. As the news moved on to other stories, Lewis muted the television. Things are moving quickly, he observed. Faster than I expected. Nicholas's phone buzzed with a call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's an unknown number. Lewis shrugged. Probably a journalist. They're all trying to get exclusive comments from us. Nicholas answered cautiously. Hello? The blood drained from his face as he listened to the caller. How did you get this number? He asked, his voice tense. Lewis watched with growing concern as his brother's expression changed from surprise to shock, to something approaching fear. I understand, Nicholas said finally. We'll be there. He ended the call and sat motionless, staring at the phone in his hand. Nick? Lewis prompted. Who was that? Nicholas looked up, his eyes troubled. That was Ron Dennis. Lewis's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Ron Dennis, the former McLaren chairman who had discovered Lewis as a child and shepherded his early career. The man who had signed Lewis to McLaren's young driver program when he was just 13. They hadn't spoken in years. What did he want? Lewis asked. He says he needs to see us. Both of us. Today. Nicholas's voice was strained. He says he has information about what really happened. Information that will change everything we think we know. Lewis frowned. Did he say what information? Nicholas shook his head. No, but he sounded... I don't know, Lewis. He sounded afraid. Ron Dennis? Afraid? Lewis couldn't hide his skepticism. The Ron Dennis he knew had been one of the most powerful and unflappable figures in Formula One. He said to meet him at his house in Surrey. No phones, no recording devices. Nicholas hesitated. And he said not to tell anyone where we're going. Lewis paced the room, considering his options. This could be a trap. A way to silence us, now that we've gone public. Or it could be the final piece of the puzzle, Nicholas countered. Ron was there from the beginning of your career. If anyone knows the whole truth, it's him. Lewis stopped, pacing, and looked at his brother. Whatever it is, we face it together this time. No more secrets between us. Nicholas nodded. Together. 3 hours later, their car pulled up to the electronic gates of Ron Dennis's Surrey estate. The former McLaren boss had retired from Formula One in 2017, but remained an influential figure in British business. As the gates swung open, Lewis felt a strange sense of returning to his past. This man had changed his life, given him his first real opportunity in Formula One. Yet, they had parted on difficult terms when Lewis left McLaren for Mercedes. The butler led them through the immaculate house to Ron's study. The room was exactly as Lewis remembered it, meticulously organized, with not a paper out of place or a book misaligned on the shelves. Ron Dennis stood as they entered. At 77, he looked older than Lewis remembered. but still carried himself with the same precision and control that had defined his management style. Lewis, Nicholas. Ron greeted them with a formal nod. "Thank you for coming." "Your call was rather mysterious, Ron," Lewis said, declining to sit, despite Ron's gesture toward the chairs. "With good reason," Ron replied. "What I'm about to tell you must remain in this room until the FIA investigation is complete. Do I have your word?" The brothers exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. Ron walked to his desk and retrieved a small key from his pocket. He unlocked a drawer and removed a USB drive, holding it up for them to see. "This contains documents that I've kept secure for over 25 years, he explained. Documents that tell the complete story of what happened before the Buckmore Park race and after. Nicholas leaned forward. "You knew about the sabotage?" "Not initially," Ron admitted. "But I discovered it later, and when I did, I made a decision that has haunted me ever since." Lewis crossed his arms. "What decision, Ron?" Ron Dennis's usually impassive face showed a flicker of emotion. "I chose to protect the sport, rather than expose the truth. A decision I've regretted every day since." He inserted the USB drive into his computer. "But now, you both need to see what really happened, and who was really responsible." As the first document appeared on the screen, Lewis and Nicholas Hamilton stepped forward, about to discover the final secret that would reshape not just their understanding of the past, but the future of Formula One itself. The document that appeared on Ron Dennis's screen was an internal McLaren memo, dated 1 week before the Buckmore Park race. At the top was the McLaren logo, and beneath it the words, "Confidential Young Driver Assessment Program." Lewis and Nicholas leaned closer, their eyes scanning the text. "McLaren Racing is committed to identifying and developing the finest racing talents, regardless of background," the memo began. "However, concerns have been raised about the commercial viability of certain candidates whose profiles do not align with our traditional sponsor demographics." Nicholas inhaled sharply. "Commercial viability? Is that code for what I think it is?" Ron nodded grimly. "Keep reading." The memo continued. "The Hamilton boy shows exceptional natural ability, but presents significant marketing challenges. Before proceeding with formal evaluation at Buckmore Park, management requests a comprehensive assessment of potential sponsor reactions to his inclusion in the program." Lewis's jaw tightened. "So it was about race all along, not just my background, but the color of my skin." "Yes," Ron admitted quietly. "But that's not the whole story." He clicked to the next document, an email from Martin Whitmarsh to several McLaren executives, including Ron himself. "I've conducted informal discussions with our major sponsors," the email read. "Responses were mixed, with particular concerns from our Middle Eastern and Asian partners. 2 have explicitly stated they would reconsider their involvement if our young driver program's image changes significantly." Nicholas looked at Ron in disbelief. "They were willing to lose the most talented young driver in Britain because some sponsors might be uncomfortable with a black kid in their ads?" "It was 1999, Ron said, not as an excuse, but as context. Formula One was a different world then." "So Whitmarsh was acting on instructions?" Lewis asked, his voice controlled despite his evident anger. Ron hesitated. "Not exactly." The next document explains what really happened. He clicked again, revealing a handwritten note that had been scanned into the system. It was addressed to Ron Dennis, with no signature. "Ron, someone accessed the Hamilton file last night. Security footage shows Whitmarsh's pass was used, but he claims he was home. Garage access logs show entry at 2:13 a.m. The cart was unattended. for approximately 17 minutes. Should we investigate further? Lewis and Nicholas exchanged shocked glances. You knew, Nicholas said accusingly. You knew someone had tampered with Lewis's cart. Not before it happened, Ron clarified. This note came to me 3 days after the Buckmore Park race, after Lewis had already won and caught our attention. But you didn't do anything about it, Lewis stated, his voice cold. Ron's usually impassive face showed genuine regret. I made a choice I've regretted ever since. I decided to protect the team's reputation rather than pursue the truth. He clicked to the next document, security camera footage from the McLaren garage where Lewis's cart had been stored before the race. The grainy video showed a figure entering, working on the cart for several minutes, then leaving hurriedly. Person who sabotaged your cart wasn't Whitmarsh, Ron revealed. The pass was his, but the person using it wasn't. He paused the video and zoomed in on the figure's face, enhancing the image as much as the old footage would allow. Nicholas gasped. That's Adrian Newey, Lewis finished in disbelief. The face on the screen, though younger and partially obscured, was unmistakably that of Adrian Newey, now Red Bull's chief technical officer and widely considered the greatest Formula One designer of all time. In 1999, he had been McLaren's technical director. But why? Nicholas asked, bewildered. Why would Adrian Newey try to sabotage a child's racing career? Ron sighed heavily. It wasn't about Lewis personally. It was about protecting his own position. He clicked to another email, this one from Newey to Whitmarsh. Martin, Dennis is obsessed with this Hamilton kid. Says he's the future of McLaren. Says our entire technical approach needs to adapt to his driving style, even though he's just a child. If Dennis redirects resources from the F1 team to his pet project, our championship hopes are finished. Something needs to be done before the key. Buckmore evaluation. Newey. Lewis sat down heavily, trying to process this revelation. Adrian Newey sabotaged my cart because he thought a child would take resources away from the Formula One team? It was the height of the McLaren-Ferrari rivalry, Ron explained. Newey was under immense pressure to deliver a car that could beat Schumacher. He saw my interest in you as a distraction. Nicholas shook his head in disbelief. But how does Domenicali fit into this? His signature was on the memo I found. Ron clicked to another document. This one, a formal letter from Ferrari to McLaren, dated 1 month after the Buckmore Park race. Dear Mr. Dennis, it began. It has come to our attention through a mutual sponsor that McLaren is considering adding a non-traditional candidate to its young driver program. As a courtesy between competitors, we wish to advise that such a decision might impact certain shared commercial relationships in markets where diversity initiatives are not aligned with local values. The letter was signed by Stefano Domenicali, then Ferrari's sporting director. They were threatening McLaren's sponsors, Nicholas realized. Not threatening, Ron corrected. Warning, there's a distinction in the racing world. Lewis stood abruptly, pacing the room. So Newey sabotaged my cart to protect McLaren's F1 program. Whitmarsh's pass was used, but he claims it wasn't him, and Ferrari was applying commercial pressure to prevent McLaren from signing me. That's the simplified version, yes, Ron confirmed. But you signed me anyway, Lewis pointed out. Despite all this opposition, Ron allowed himself a small smile, a rare sight for those who knew him. I saw you drive that day at Buckmore Park. Everyone was watching the race. I was watching you. The way you handled the cart, the lines you took, your racecraft at such a young age. I knew then that I would sign you regardless of the consequences. So, "What happened to Newey?" Nicholas asked. "If you knew he was responsible?" Ron's expression darkened. "I confronted him privately, told him I had evidence of what he'd done, gave him a choice: resign immediately or I would make it public." "But he didn't resign," Lewis pointed out. "He stayed at McLaren until 2005. Because he called my bluff," Ron admitted. "He knew I wouldn't risk the scandal, knew I wouldn't risk losing him to another team. So we reached an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Nicholas pressed. Ron looked uncomfortable for the first time. "He agreed never to interfere with your career again. And I agreed to create a completely separate development track for you. One that wouldn't touch the F1 team's resources until you were ready to make the jump." Lewis processed this information slowly. "So, when I finally reached Formula One in 2007, Newey was already gone to Red Bull," Ron finished. "Not coincidentally." Nicholas looked troubled. "But if Newey was the one who sabotaged the kart, why was Whitmarsh's badge in our garage? Why did Whitmarsh call Lewis yesterday?" Ron clicked to a final document. A resignation letter from Martin Whitmarsh to McLaren, dated 2014, after Lewis had already left for Mercedes. "As I depart McLaren after 25 years," the letter read, "I feel compelled to acknowledge my greatest regret. While I did not personally attempt to derail Lewis Hamilton's career, I was aware of actions taken by others and remained silent. This silence made me complicit. I have carried this burden throughout Lewis's career and can no longer reconcile it with my conscience." Lewis sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb everything they'd learned. "Why are you showing us this now, Ron?" Nicholas finally asked. "After all these years?" Ron closed the files and removed the USB drive, handing it to Lewis. "Because the MIT FIA investigation will uncover most of this anyway. And because you deserve to know the whole truth." He looked directly at Lewis. "I failed you. Not by signing you or supporting your career. I'll never regret that. But by not standing up more forcefully against those who tried to stop you, by making compromises I should never have made." Lewis studied the man who had shaped so much of his early career. "You gave me my chance, Ron. Whatever else happened, you believed in me when others didn't." Ron nodded, accepting this limited absolution. "There's one more thing you should know. The reason I asked you here today." He walked to the window, looking out at his manicured gardens. "Adrian Newey is leaving Red Bull at the end of this season. He's in discussions with Ferrari." Lewis and Nicholas exchanged alarmed glances. "Ferrari approached me 2 months ago about joining them next year," Lewis revealed. "Just like you said on TV, Nick." "It wasn't a coincidence," Ron stated flatly. "Newey has one condition for joining Ferrari: that they not sign Lewis Hamilton." The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air. After all these years, the same forces that had tried to stop Lewis's career before it began were still working against him. "History repeating itself," Nicholas murmured. Lewis stood, pocketing the USB drive. "Not this time," he said firmly. "This time, we know the truth. And we have proof." Ron looked troubled. "What are you going to do?" Lewis glanced at his brother, a silent communication passing between them. "What we should have done 25 years ago. Tell the whole truth, no matter what it costs." As the Hamilton brothers left Ron Dennis's house, they knew they were about to make the hardest decision of their lives, one that would shake Formula One to its foundations and forever change the sport they loved. But first, they needed to make one crucial phone call to the one person who could help them navigate what came next. The person who had always believed in Lewis, even when leaving McLaren seemed like career suicide. "We need to see Toto," Lewis told his brother as they got into the car. "Right now." The sleek Mercedes pulled away from Ron Dennis's Surrey estate, carrying the Hamilton brothers toward an uncertain future. Lewis sat silently in the passenger seat while Nicholas drove, both processing the shocking revelations they had just witnessed. "Do you believe him?" Nicholas finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Lewis stared out the window at the passing English countryside. "Ron Dennis has many flaws, but he's never been a liar. At least, not to me." So Adrian Newey, the most celebrated designer in Formula One, tried to sabotage your career before it even began. Nicholas shook his head in disbelief. "And he's still trying to block you 25 years later." Lewis pulled out his phone and called the one person he trusted completely in the Formula One world. After 2 rings, a familiar Austrian accent answered. "Lewis, I've been waiting for your call. Toto, we need to meet. Today. It's urgent." "Of course," Toto Wolff replied without hesitation. "The team is at Brackley. I can have a helicopter pick you up." Lewis glanced at his brother. "There's a small airfield near Guildford. We can be there in 20 minutes. "It's done," Toto confirmed. "And Lewis, whatever this is about, Mercedes stands with you. Always." As Nicholas drove toward the airfield, Lewis explained what they had learned from Ron Dennis: the sabotage, Newey's involvement, Whitmarsh's complicity through silence, and Domenicali's warning letter from Ferrari. "It's bigger than we thought, Nick," Lewis concluded. "This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about who gets to succeed in Formula One, who belongs in this sport." Nicholas nodded gravely. "The question is, what do we do now?" Lewis stared at the USB drive in his hand, containing evidence that could shake Formula One to its core. "That's why we need Toto. This isn't just my decision anymore. It affects Mercedes, my team, the whole sport." The sleek black helicopter with the Mercedes star emblazoned on its side was waiting when they arrived. Within minutes, they were airborne, flying toward the Mercedes F1 headquarters in Brackley. "I never thought it would come to this," Lewis said as they watched the landscape beneath them. "When you spoke up on TV, I thought it would lead to some uncomfortable questions, maybe a few resignations. Not this." Nicholas looked troubled. "Are you angry with me? For starting all this?" Lewis shook his head firmly. "No, never. The truth needed to come out, Nick. I just never imagined how deep it went." The helicopter landed on the Mercedes campus helipad 40 minutes later. Toto Wolff was waiting for them, his tall frame silhouetted against the modern glass building that housed the most successful Formula One team of the modern era. "Lewis, Nicholas." Toto embraced them both, then led them quickly inside, away from any potential observers. They walked through the facility where Lewis had celebrated 6 of his 7 world championships, passing the wall displaying all of Mercedes's race-winning cars. In Toto's office, Lewis placed the USB drive on the desk. "Before we show you what's on this, there's something I need to ask you, Toto." The Mercedes team principal sat back, giving Lewis his full attention. "Anything. Did you know Ferrari approached Adrian Newey? That he made not signing me a condition of joining them?" A flash of anger crossed Toto's normally composed face. "Yes. I heard rumors last week. I was going to discuss it with you after the race weekend." Lewis nodded, unsurprised by Toto's honesty. "And what was your reaction?" "I called John Elkann directly," Toto replied without hesitation. "I told him that any team choosing a technical director over the greatest driver of this generation was making a historic mistake. Nicholas smiled slightly. And what did Elkann say? He said Ferrari makes its own decisions based on what's best for the team. Toto's expression hardened. I reminded him that what was best for the team in Formula One's history has often meant excluding certain people for reasons that had nothing to do with talent. Lewis felt a surge of gratitude toward the man who had not only given him a car capable of winning championships, but had also created an environment where he could be himself. "Show him," Lewis told his brother, gesturing to the USB drive. For the next hour, they reviewed the documents Ron Dennis had given them. Toto's expression grew darker with each revelation, his legendary composure slipping to reveal genuine outrage. When they finished, Toto stood and walked to the window overlooking the Mercedes campus, where hundreds of people worked tirelessly to build Lewis's cars. "This goes beyond sporting rivalry," he said finally. "This is discrimination, plain and simple. Trying to keep someone out because they don't fit the traditional mold." He turned back to face the brothers. "The question is, what do you want to do with this information, Lewis? It's your career, your legacy. The decision must be yours." Lewis stood and joined Toto at the window. In the distance, he could see engineers entering the wind tunnel building, mechanics heading to the fabrication department. People who believed in him, who had helped him make history. If this were just about me, I might be tempted to let it go, Lewis admitted. "I've won 7 world championships. I've broken almost every record. I've proven them wrong 100 times over." He turned to face his brother and Toto. "But this isn't just about me. It's about the next kid from a council estate who dreams of racing in Formula One. It's about making sure talent is what matters, not background or skin color, or whether you fit some sponsor's idea of the right image." Nicholas nodded in understanding. "So you want to make it public? All of it?" Lewis considered this carefully. "Not yet. First, I want to give Adrian Newey a chance to tell the truth himself." Toto looked surprised. "You want to confront him directly?" "Yes," Lewis confirmed. "Before the FIA investigation goes further, before this becomes a media circus that damages the sport we all love." He pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call him now. Ask him to meet us. The 3 of us." Toto and Nicholas exchanged concerned glances. "Are you sure that's wise?" Toto asked. "He could deny everything, claim the evidence is fabricated." "He could," Lewis agreed, "but I don't think he will. Adrian Newey is many things, but he's not a coward." Lewis dialed the number. After several rings, Adrian Newey answered. "Lewis?" The surprise in his voice was evident. "This is unexpected. We need to talk, Adrian, about Buckmore Park, 1999, about what you did to my cart." A long silence followed. When Newey finally spoke, his voice had lost its confident edge. "How did you find out?" "Ron Dennis kept the security footage. And your emails to Whitmarsh." Another silence, longer this time. "Where and when?" Newey asked finally. "Mercedes headquarters. Today. Now. I'll be there in an hour." Lewis ended the call and looked at his brother and Toto. "He's coming." The wait was tense. Lewis paced Toto's office, while Nicholas sat quietly, watching his brother. "What are you going to do if he admits it?" Nicholas asked finally. Lewis stopped pacing. "I'm going to offer him a choice, the same choice I've tried to offer everyone in my career. Be part of the solution, or be remembered as part of the problem." When Adrian Newey arrived, he came alone. No lawyers, no Red Bull representatives. The legendary designer looked older than his years as he was escorted into Toto's office, the weight of the past clearly visible in his expression. The 4 men sat at Toto's conference table, For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lewis broke the silence. "Why, Adrian? I was just a child." Newey looked down at his hands. "It wasn't about you personally, Lewis. It was never about you. It was about what I represented," Lewis stated flatly. "A change you weren't ready for." Newey didn't deny it. Formula One in the late 90s was different, more traditional, more resistant to change. He sighed heavily. "And I was focused entirely on beating Ferrari, on giving Mika Häkkinen a car that could defeat Michael Schumacher. So you sabotaged a child's kart because you were afraid Ron Dennis would divert resources to his young driver program?" Nicholas couldn't keep the anger from his voice. "It was wrong," Newey admitted quietly. "Inexcusably wrong. I've had to live with that knowledge for 25 years. Lewis studied the man across from him, the design genius behind championships at Williams, McLaren, and Red Bull. "And now you're making not signing me a condition of joining Ferrari. History repeating itself." Newey looked up sharply. "That's not true. I never told Ferrari not to sign you. But you expressed concerns about working with me," Lewis pressed. "Suggested that the team dynamics might be complicated if I were there." Newey hesitated. "Yes, I did say something like that." Lewis leaned forward. "Because you've been afraid of me my entire career, Adrian. Not me as a driver, but what I represent. Change. Progress. A different kind of Formula One than the one you grew up in." Newey didn't respond, but his expression confirmed Lewis's words. "Here's what's going to happen," Lewis continued. "The FIA investigation is going to uncover most of what we already know. Domenicali has stepped aside. Whitmarsh has admitted his complicity through silence. It's only a matter of time before your role comes to light." "What do you want from me?" Newey asked quietly. "The truth," Lewis replied simply. "A public statement, acknowledging what you did and why you did it. Not to destroy you or your legacy, but to help Formula One confront its past honestly." Newey considered this for a long moment. "And if I refuse?" Lewis gestured to the USB drive on the table. "Then we release everything, the footage, the emails, all of it. And your legacy becomes defined not by your brilliant designs, but by this." The room fell silent as Newey weighed his options. Finally, he looked up, meeting Lewis's gaze directly for the first time. "I'll do it," he said. "Not because of your ultimatum, but because it's time. Past time." Lewis nodded, satisfied. "One more thing. The Ferrari deal. Your opposition to them signing me." Newey stood, straightening his shoulders. "I'll call John Elkann today. Tell him my personal feelings should have no bearing on their driver decisions." As Newey prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Lewis. Watching what you've accomplished, how you've changed this sport for the better, it's made me reconsider many things I once believed." After Newey left, Lewis, Nicholas, and Toto sat in thoughtful silence. "Do you think he'll follow through?" Nicholas asked finally. "Yes," Lewis replied. "He has too much to lose by backing out now." Toto nodded in agreement. "So, what's our next step?" Lewis took a deep breath, the weight of his decision evident. "We wait for Newey's statement. Then I make one of my own. Not about the past, but about the future." He looked at his brother. "About making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to the next generation. About making Formula One truly open to everyone with the talent and determination to succeed." As the three men left Toto's office, Lewis felt lighter than he had in years. The truth was finally emerging, painful as it might be. And with it came the hope that the sport he loved could finally become what it always should have been, a true meritocracy where talent alone determined who succeeded. But even Lewis couldn't predict the storm that was about to break when Adrian Newey stepped before the cameras the next morning, a storm that would change Formula One forever. The press room at Red Bull Racing's Milton Keynes headquarters was filled to capacity. Journalists from around the world had gathered on less than 24 hours' notice after a cryptic statement announced that Adrian Newey would be addressing recent allegations regarding historical events in Formula One. Television cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting live to millions worldwide. On social media, F1 Confession was already trending globally as speculation ran wild about what the legendary designer might say. Lewis and Nicholas Hamilton sat in their hotel room in London, watching the broadcast together. They had been offered seats at the press conference but had declined, preferring to witness this moment privately. "Do you think he'll actually go through with it?" Nicholas asked, his eyes fixed on the screen. Lewis nodded slowly. "He has no choice now. Too many people know the truth." On screen, Christian Horner, Red Bull's team principal, stepped to the podium. His usually confident demeanor seemed subdued as he faced the assembled media. "Good morning," Horner began. "As you know, Adrian Newey has requested this opportunity to address certain matters that have emerged in recent days. I want to make it clear that while this press conference is taking place at our facility, Adrian is speaking entirely for himself today." The calculated distancing was not lost on anyone present. Red Bull was already preparing to separate itself from whatever bombshell Newey was about to drop. Horner stepped aside as Adrian Newey walked to the podium. The most successful designer in Formula One history looked distinctly uncomfortable, his normally relaxed posture rigid with tension. "Thank you for coming at such short notice," Newey began, his voice unusually quiet. "I'm here today to address allegations that have emerged regarding events from 1999, specifically concerning Lewis Hamilton's early career." A hushed anticipation fell over the room. Even the most jaded journalists sensed they were witnessing a historic moment in the sport. 25 years ago, I made a decision that I have regretted ever since," Newey continued. "A decision that was professionally unethical, morally wrong, and potentially career-ending for a talented young driver." In their hotel room, Nicholas reached over and squeezed his brother's shoulder. Prior to an important karting evaluation where McLaren scouts would be watching young drivers, I deliberately tampered with Lewis Hamilton's kart, Newey admitted, his voice wavering slightly. "I loosened bolts, altered engine settings, and created potentially dangerous conditions that could have caused equipment failure during his race." Gasps echoed through the press room. Even though rumors had been circulating since Nicholas's television appearance, hearing Adrian Newey confess directly was still shocking. "I want to be clear," Newey continued. "This was not authorized by McLaren. As an organization, Ron Dennis had no knowledge of my actions. Martin Whitmarsh did not participate, though he later became aware of what I had done and remained silent." Newey paused, visibly struggling with his next words. "My motivation was not personal animus toward Lewis Hamilton. I had never even met him. My concern, as misguided and inexcusable as it was, centered on what I perceived as a potential diversion of resources from McLaren's Formula One program to a young driver initiative during a critical championship battle with Ferrari." In the hotel room, Lewis shook his head in disbelief. Even saying it out loud, it sounds so petty, so small-minded. Newey continued his confession. "What I failed to understand then, and have come to recognize in the years since, is that my actions were not just professionally unethical, but stemmed from unconscious biases about who belongs in this sport." Lewis Hamilton didn't fit the traditional profile of a Formula One driver, and that made him seem like a risky investment to many in the paddock, myself included. The designer looked directly into the camera. "Lewis, if you're watching, I want to say publicly what I told you privately yesterday. I am profoundly sorry, not just for what I did to your kart, but for the attitude it represented. An attitude that has persisted in subtle ways throughout your career." Nicholas nudged his brother. "He's going beyond what we discussed." Newey wasn't finished. "What Lewis may not know is that my sabotage attempt ultimately didn't matter. His kart was repaired before the race, apparently by his younger brother, Nicholas, though I only learned this recently. Lewis won convincingly, and Ron Dennis signed him to McLaren's Young Driver program despite concerns from sponsors and partners." He gripped the sides of the podium. "I have watched Lewis Hamilton become one of the greatest drivers in history, breaking records, setting new standards, and changing our sport for the better. The fact that he succeeded despite the obstacles placed in his path by myself and others speaks to his extraordinary talent and character." Newey took a deep breath before continuing. "Recent reports have suggested that I have opposed Ferrari signing Lewis Hamilton for next season. While I did express concerns about team dynamics, I want to state categorically that Lewis Hamilton would be an asset to any team in Formula One, including Ferrari." In the hotel room, Lewis's phone rang. The screen showed John Elkann, Ferrari. Lewis silenced it without answering. "Not now," he murmured to his brother. "This is more important." On screen, Newey was addressing the broader implications of his confession. What happened in 1999 was not an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of systemic issues within Formula One, issues that continue to influence who gets opportunities in this sport and who doesn't. He looked around the press room. For too long, Formula One has been an exclusive club with unwritten rules about who belongs. Those barriers are slowly coming down, thanks in large part to Lewis Hamilton's advocacy. But we have much further to go. Newey straightened his shoulders. "I have informed Red Bull Racing that I am making myself available to the FIA's investigation into these matters. I will cooperate fully and transparently." He cleared his throat. I am also announcing today that I will be establishing a foundation to support young drivers from underrepresented backgrounds, providing them with the financial resources and mentorship needed to progress through the ranks of motorsport. The press room erupted with questions, journalists shouting over each other for Newey's attention, but he held up his hand for silence. "One final point," he said. "Throughout my career, I have worked with extraordinary drivers, Mansell, Prost, Häkkinen, Vettel, Verstappen, but I have never worked with Lewis Hamilton. That remains the greatest missed opportunity of my professional life, an opportunity lost because of my own biases and fears 25 years ago." With that, Adrian Newey stepped away from the podium, ignoring the barrage of questions as he left the room. In their hotel, Lewis and Nicholas sat in stunned silence. "Well," Nicholas said finally, "that was more than we expected." Lewis nodded, still processing what he had just witnessed. He didn't just admit what he did. He acknowledged why he did it. His phone rang again. Toto Wolff this time. Lewis answered on speaker. "Are you watching this?" Toto asked without preamble. "Yes," Lewis confirmed. "We saw everything." "It's causing a firestorm," Toto reported. "Social media is exploding. Other journalists are coming forward with stories about discrimination they've witnessed over the years. It's like a dam has broken." Lewis's phone beeped with another call waiting. Ferrari again. Toto, I need to call you back. Ferrari is trying to reach me. Of course, Toto replied. But Lewis, whatever you decide about next year, Mercedes remains. Your home for as long as you want it to be. Lewis ended the call and looked at his brother. Should I answer Ferrari? Nicholas considered this carefully. I think you have to. After what Newey just said, they're probably panicking. Lewis accepted the call. John, he greeted Ferrari's chairman calmly. Lewis, John Elkann responded, his Italian accent more pronounced than usual. I wanted to reach out immediately after Adrian Newey's statement. I appreciate that, Lewis said neutrally. I want to make Ferrari's position absolutely clear, Elkann continued. Any suggestion that we would choose a technical director over you as a driver is completely false. Our offer to you stands. In fact, we're prepared to improve it substantially. Lewis caught his brother's eye, both recognizing the desperation in Elkann's voice. I appreciate your interest, John, Lewis replied, diplomatically, but I'll need time to consider my options. Today's revelations have given me a lot to think about. Of course, Elkann agreed quickly. Take all the time you need, but please know that Ferrari's doors are wide open to you. After ending the call, Lewis turned to his brother with a slight smile. Funny how quickly things change. Nicholas nodded. Yesterday, Newey was making your signing a deal-breaker. Today, they're begging you to join. Lewis's phone continued to light up with notifications. Team principals, fellow drivers, celebrities, politicians, all reacting to Newey's confession. It's bigger than just me now, Lewis observed. This could be the moment Formula One finally confronts its past. Nicholas looked thoughtful. What will you do next? Make your own statement? Lewis shook his head. Not yet. First, I need to speak with someone. Who? Nicholas asked. The person who repaired my cart all those years ago, Lewis said with a warm smile. My little brother, who believed in me even when the most powerful people in Formula One didn't. He put his arm around Nicholas's shoulders. Without you, none of this would have happened. I would never have gotten that chance to show what I could do. Nicholas blinked back unexpected tears. I was just protecting my big brother. Like you. Always protected me. Lewis's phone rang again. An unknown number this time. He answered cautiously. Lewis Hamilton? A woman's voice asked. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a junior engineer at Alpine F1. I wanted to thank you and your brother for speaking up. Lewis put the call on speaker, so Nicholas could hear. After hearing what happened to you, Sarah continued, I've decided to file a formal complaint about discrimination I've faced in my team. I wouldn't have had the courage without seeing what you've started. Thank you for telling me, Lewis replied warmly, and for having the courage to speak up. After the call ended, Lewis looked at his brother with renewed determination. This is just the beginning, Nick. The real work starts now. Nicholas nodded, in agreement. So, what's our next move? Lewis thought for a moment. I think it's time to tell my story. The whole story. Not just about what happened with the cart, but everything that came after. All the subtle barriers, the double standards, the things I kept quiet about to avoid being labeled difficult. He stood, energized by the decision. No more silence, no more protecting the sport from its own truth. As the Hamilton brothers prepared to continue their fight for a more inclusive Formula One, neither knew that the final, most shocking revelation was still to come. A truth that would redefine not just Lewis's career, but the very history of the sport itself. 2 days after Adrian Newey's shocking confession, Lewis and Nicholas Hamilton sat in the private dining room of a discreet London restaurant. The small space had been secured for complete privacy, away from the media frenzy that had engulfed Formula One since the revelations began. Across from them sat three individuals who had requested this urgent meeting. Susie Wolff, former test driver for Williams and current CEO of the F1 Academy for young female drivers. Angela Cullen, Lewis's former performance coach and confidant. And Mark Jenkins, a senior FIA official overseeing the investigation into discrimination in Formula One.